Welcome everyone. So today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a deep dive into the film V for Vendetta. But we're not just here for the action and the drama. Nope, we're going to use it as a kind of sociological microscope to zoom in on two massive concepts: deviance and social control. And what we're going to see is how this film shows brilliantly that what a society calls deviant and how it tries to control that, well, that tells you everything you need to know about who really holds the power.
So let's just kick things off with a huge question, one that's really at the heart of sociology. What actually makes something deviant? I mean, is an act just wrong on its own, or does its meaning totally depend on the context, where it happens, when it happens, and who's there to see it? This is a really key shift in thinking. We're moving from looking just at the act to seeing the whole social picture. So here's our game plan. We're going to break this down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at deviance not just as an act, but as a whole social event. Then we'll get into who has the power to stick that deviant label on someone. After that, we'll explore the systems used to enforce the rules, the role law plays in all this. And finally, and this is my favorite part, we'll talk about the fascinating irony of how trying to crush deviance can sometimes just create more.
All right, let's dive right into our first big idea. And this is a really fundamental shift in how we think about this stuff. We're going to move our focus from what a person does to the entire situation where it all goes down.
You see, a deviant event isn't just about someone breaking a rule. It's the whole scene. It includes the person doing the thing, sure, but also any victims, the specific circumstances, even the history that brought them all to that moment. It's about getting the whole story, not just a single isolated snapshot of behavior.
V's takeover of the state broadcast, it's the perfect, and I mean perfect example of this. The act is pretty simple, hijacking a TV station. But the event, wow, that's so much bigger. You've got V as the actor, you've got the entire public and the powerful Northfire regime as the audience, the setting, a state-controlled media network, and the context is this oppressive totalitarian society. So his act isn't just a crime anymore. It becomes this massive challenge to the regime's control over reality itself. The meaning is created by everyone involved.
And that leads us perfectly into our next point, because once an act gets labeled as deviant, the spotlight can shift from what a person did to who that person is. And this is where the label itself becomes an incredibly powerful tool.
Okay, check this out. There's a huge difference between a deviant act and a deviant role. A deviant act is just something you do. We all break little rules now and then, speeding maybe, but those actions don't define who we are. But a deviant role, that's a whole different ballgame. That's when the label sticks, and it becomes the main thing society sees when they look at you. You're no longer a person who did something wrong. You are the wrongdoer.
And this is precisely what the Northfire regime does to V. The word terrorist isn't just a simple description. It's a weapon. It's a powerful label that's designed to shut down all debate, to trigger a specific, harsh response, and to make it basically impossible for anyone in the public to feel sympathy for him. It's a masterclass in using labels as a form of power.
So, if deviance is defined and labeled by the people in charge, then how exactly is that definition enforced? Well, that brings us to what we call the architecture of social control, all the systems, big and small, that keep society in line.
Now, social control kind of operates on 2 levels. First, you've got the informal stuff. This is the peer pressure, the gossip, the fear of what your neighbors might think. In the movie, this is the deep-seated fear and self-censorship you see everywhere. Then, you've got the big guns, formal social control. These are the official, organized systems, the police, the courts, mass surveillance, and state-run media pumping out propaganda.
But the most powerful kind of social control is the kind you can't even see. It's called internalization. And this is when people absorb the state's rules so deeply that they start policing themselves. The Northfire regime is scarily good at this. They weaponize fear to make citizens totally dependent on them for safety. And then they brilliantly reframe that obedience as patriotism. People actually start to want the control because it makes them feel safe.
Take a look at this table. It lays out all the different institutions that societies use for formal control. Family, religion, you name it. But see that row for the political state? That is Northfire's playground. Its agents are the police and the judges, and they go after whatever the regime has labeled deviant, using sanctions we see all through the film: prison, fines, and of course, violence.
And all of this leads us straight to the law itself, the ultimate tool of formal social control. Which makes you ask a pretty pointed question: whose rules are these anyway?
So, sociologists have two main theories about where laws come from. There's the consensus view, which says that laws are basically a reflection of what we all agree is right and wrong. But then there's the conflict view, and that view argues that laws are actually created by powerful groups to protect their own interests and to control everybody else.
V for Vendetta is pretty much a textbook illustration of that conflict view. The laws in the Norse fire regime, they have nothing to do with shared morality. They're just tools, plain and simple, designed to keep the powerful in power. The law becomes the interests of the elite, written down on paper and enforced with the barrel of a gun.
Okay, so this brings us to a really fascinating twist. All these systems of control, right? They're built to get rid of deviance. But what happens when the control itself starts to create even more of the very thing it's trying to stop? This is what we call the irony of social control. This whole process is often explained by something called secondary deviance. Here's how it works. The official reaction to someone's first misstep is so harsh, so overwhelming, that the person eventually just gives in and embraces the deviant label. The attempt to control them actually backfires and pushes them deeper into that identity. It's a vicious cycle. And in the film, you can watch this irony play out step by step. First, the regime cracks down harder. But the harder they push, the more their legitimacy starts to crumble. The public stops seeing them as protectors and starts seeing them as just bullies. And in that space, these deviants stops being a crime and becomes a powerful symbol of resistance. Until finally, the people themselves become deviant by putting on the mask and joining him.
And that's the real crisis for the regime in the end. It's not that they've run out of force. They can still arrest people. They can still kill people. Their real problem is that their punishments don't mean anything anymore. They've lost the power to persuade the public that their system is right. Their moral authority is just gone.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that deviance and social control aren't really opposites. They're more like partners in a dance, constantly shaping and defining each other. Deviance shows you where society draws its moral lines, and social control shows you what that society is most afraid of.
And that leaves us with one final big question to chew on. Analyzing a film like V for Vendetta isn't just about understanding the movie. It's about getting the tools to understand the world. It lets us look around at our own systems of control and ask a really important question. Are these systems creating order, or are they creating oppression? And how on earth do we tell the difference?